Hey, David Brewster here, new episode of Chordplay, and it's the Chords of the Kinks, and I've had some requests to feature this absolute legendary band. Very essential, just as essential as the Beatles or the Stones. The Kinks are definitely up there. And they formed in London, England in 1963, and quickly became a worldwide sensation thanks to their first album that included the song You Really Got Me, which of course has been covered by tons of people, including Van Halen. They've sold over 50 million albums worldwide, and definitely taught the world how to be a rowdy rock and roll band, the Kinks. So of course in the Kinks music we have Dave Davies on guitar. Ray Davies also played rhythm guitar, but most people think of Dave Davies as the guitarist in the Kinks. He played lead, he was the main kind of principal riff writer and stuff. An essential guitarist, literally influenced millions of players all over the world. And I've noticed in recent history, like in the last month or two, online, like on social media, there's an interview circulating around with Dave Davies. He's talking about Van Halen's cover of You Really Got Me. That was actually from the March 1990 issue of Guitar Player magazine, which I have right here. I did reread that interview and literally, word for word, quoted, directly online with those articles that are circulating. And it's like, well, Dave Davies said those words like 35 years ago. Nobody really seemed to care at the time. But then now, obviously, it's ruffled some feathers and people are upset. I'm a huge Van Halen fan, but I also, definitely respect the Kinks. And even though there might have been a few words there kind of pointed jabbing at Van Halen, I'm sure they didn't have issues or problems cashing those royalty checks, because You Really Got Me was huge. And in my opinion, Van Halen just totally knocked that song out of the park. Now, speaking of Kinks cover songs, there's lots of bands and artists that have covered Kinks music over the years and decades. And here's an image with some famous artists and bands that have covered their music, and that obviously includes Van Halen. They covered You Really Got Me, also Where Have All the Good Times Gone on Diver Down. And there's tons of other, covers of the Kinks music. And there's some artists I didn't include here, like David Bowie recorded a Kinks cover, but I think he only released that in Japan, and some other examples like that. But here's some classic Kinks covers that'll rock your socks. So once again, I was kind of intimidated putting this lesson together. In their career, the Kinks released 26 studio albums, 10 EPs, 6 live albums, 34 compilations, and 78 singles. 14 of those songs were top 10 hits. So there's a ton of music to kind of go through. And I've selected 7 Kinks albums to pull music and chord-based ideas from. And I'm attempting to do like a career retrospective, looking at some music from the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s. I didn't actually include their one album from the 90s, but this will serve up kind of a good view of the Kinks changing and kind of adapting to stylistic changes and stuff over the years and decades. So if you're a Kinks fan, buckle up, because here we go. Okay, with the opening, that was me playing around with the song Preservation. Now, this is confusing, but I'm going to try to clear the air here. In '73, the Kinks released an album called Preservation Act 1, which is on the wall right there. That song does not appear on the original release of that album. The following year, they released Preservation Act 2, and once again, that song didn't appear on that album either. It wasn't until decades later, when they released the deluxe version of that album, they included that track, which originally was just released as a single. But when I heard it, I was like, man, I dig this kind of groovy early 70s tune like this. Repeats. So really you're hearing the bass. I was looping the bass part, kind of a guitar version of the bass part, doing that. Like that. That's kind of what the bass is doing, kind of. And then you hear the opening, like the guitar part, he's doing this little... Just think E minor pentatonic right there and just playing that little melody there. And then second half's kind of tricky right there. Kind of interesting where he's grabbing that D, then going to the lower E, and then the octave E up on top. So that's just kind of a cool, kind of reminds me of some stuff that you'd hear Hendrix and some other players do. But there's the Kinks kind of rocking out right there. Come in, there's E minor right there, like the middle 4 strings of E minor, so don't play the full bar chord, just the middle 4. Then D major the same way, A major there, back to E minor, and then after you do that E minor to D the second time, you've got this little single note like that A, G, low E, and then slide that D to E. Nothing really crazy hard to play, no shredding or anything like that, no crazy Holdsworth stretches or anything, but just good, tight, well-written rock and roll, which is what the Kinks are known for. Next up's the song Revenge from the first Kinks album, and the Kinks are known for making variations of their own songs, like Lola and Ape Man are very similar. Revenge and You Really Got Me are also very similar, and Revenge is like this rowdy power chord riff. Something like that, just a rowdy F and G back and forth, very similar to You Really Got Me. That. Of course, it's faster. When that runs its course, just go to a D, and you're just really doing quarter notes at first. Then you just start strumming the crap out of it. Nothing like those early Kinks riffs. They just rock your face off. Next up's the song Tired of Waiting for You. This is from the album Kind of Kinks, and there's 2 guitars here, and I believe Dave Davies is doing this. Ray, I believe, is doing the power chords under it, F and G, once again, just like we saw in Revenge. When you put those guitars together, I'm going to loop this with the MXR clone looper, and Tired of Waiting for You, something like this. Real simple stuff there. So that's like an implied G6 with that G, power chord played with that. And then when you hear this, right, that's over F. Like that. So that's like an F add 9 down there. So it's real crafty the way, the power chord guitar part and that clean part on top come together, and you have that implied G6 and implied F add 9. Really cool. Next up's the opening to the song There's a Change in the Weather. This is from Preservation Act 1, and it's real short and sweet. It's just kind of a short intro, but I dug it. I was like, man, that's really cool. Like this. Something like that. So we're in G, or kind of G7 right there. And you definitely hear like the root note there, that 3rd fret bar, and then he's hammering on the major 3rd, that, minor to major 3rd, B flat to B. And then right after that hammer on, you distinctly hear him play harmonics there on the D and the G string on the 5th fret. And you just kind of like rapidly strumming those harmonics, but it's like this rhythmic kind of percussive effect. Right, and then after you do the harmonics, then you're going to play that partial C right there. I guess you could also think of it like a G sus4, I guess, and then go back to that minor and major hammer-on. And then you're going to do like just regular muted strums. And then do all that again. not really hard to play. It's just super funky, and I dug those harmonics kind of thrown in the mix too. That's really cool. Next up's the song Yo-Yo. This is from the album Give the People What They Want, and now we're serving up some 80s Kinks. So far we've looked at 60s and 70s examples. Now this is Kinks in the 80s, and Yo-Yo is like this. Cool to hear these kind of dreamy, 80s type chords. So that is basically a D minor add 9. Think of a D minor bar chord, but open up the high E, like that. So there's the first chord, D minor add 9, and then you hear this, and that's an A minor 7, played like that. So you strum it, then you kind of do like a half strum at the end. Take that A minor 7, then just go to a regular like cowboy A minor down there. And then it's D minor, D sus2, D minor. And you do all that again, and that's Yo-Yo. Okay, next up's the bridge to the song Ape Man. This is from the Lola vs. Power Man album, and I have to admit, I kind of half forgot about this song, and then putting this lesson together and revisiting the Kinks music, I listened to it again, and I was like, oh yeah, Ape Man, I totally forgot. This song rules, and this bridge is like... like that. So Ape Man's really just a 1, 4, 5, and A, right? And there's a lot of A and E, and then occasionally a D thrown in. And this is like the kind of change, like that bridge, or what I'm calling the bridge. And we're really doing like an A over C sharp kind of action. So think of like those R&B and soul kind of chords, right? And then we're also playing with E over G sharp the same way, right? So I put these chords right there. Now you could also do the A way down here, and then you could hike all the way up here for that E, right? But for whatever reason, I just like putting it right side by side. There's the A over C sharp, and then there's the E over G sharp, right? So once again, think of those R&B and soul kind of moves. Like a little melody happening there, right? You're gonna do the exact same thing in E, like E over G sharp right here. Do the same thing in A over C sharp again. Back to that E over G sharp. And the second time you're doing like that, and then it kind of moves in. Goes back into that main part of the song. But that bridge, I always dug that real soulful sound. Next up's the song Gotta Get the First Plane Home from the album The Kink Controversy. So we're going back into the 60s Kinks era. And I really dig this like super rowdy bar chord action in the second half of this riff. Something like this. Something like that. So it's like a G7 kind of riff right there, a big slide off that G to the lower G, and you're starting this riff. So just think like G7 there, right? Like that. And then do it again. Do it 2 more times. Take the exact same riff, move it to the 4 chord C, and do it right there. And now it's it's time for those rowdy bar chords. A B flat major right there. So it's really like the bottom, part of the chord than the top. Then go to an F major right there and do kind of a similar thing. But then you're going to strum it more at the end. And it goes right back to that G riff. And I like those rowdy, kind of raunchy, 60s guitar riffs. Really cool. Okay, last but not least is the song Sleepless Night. This is from the Kinks' 1977 album Sleepwalker. And there's really only one chord appearing in this intro part. It's played twice. It's a D minor. But it's like this lead guitar, kind of melodic intro. And I just dug it. I was like, yeah, this is pretty cool. Even though there's not a lot of chord action, but it's cool, like this. So actually just start with a single D right there, right? And then you hear this, so you're kind of sliding that A, doing a hammer-on pull-out between that C and D, and then ending up on that D, like that. And then you hear this kind of it sounds like a telly, big time. Because you're hearing almost like a slight pinch harmonic, grabbing that C note, then you bend it to D and then slide it to D. Like that. And then, so you're doing that same kind of shift slide, and then you're moving into D minor pentatonic right there. When you get to that high F note, go back to this B flat, and you're going to continue that melodic, right, like that. When you play that A note, then strum a D minor bar chord right there. And then pick up the melody again on that B flat, and you're doing, and you hit that A again, and then strum that D minor chord again. And it actually ends with that same little kind of hammer-on pull-off slide thing, and it goes right into the verse right there. But that's a really interesting song, and that's an interesting album too from the Kinks. Very different, 1977. So that's really a different taste and look at the Kinks music. And I just grabbed that because I thought it was cool. It's like, hey, it's kind of like a guitar solo with a couple, bar chords thrown in. All right, that's going to wrap this episode of Chordplay with this look at the chords of the Kinks. And definitely, this episode was long overdue. I've had the Kinks on my list for a long time, and I've noticed requests, coming in over the years here, doing this channel. And it's one of those bands, very essential, very important, very influential. They really did kind of shape rock music, in the different decades that they, appeared in. And it's just really interesting to go back and listen to some of that music, and then you kind of like notice, similarities in songs. Like I was talking about how they made like variations of their own music, and that's actually really common in music history. That goes all the way back to classical musicians. Mozart and Beethoven and people like that would make variations of something that they'd already written or whatever. And with the Kinks, they were guilty of that. I don't know if it's really something you could be guilty of, but the Lola Ape Man, kind of connection, you really got me with Revenge and some of this. Like you're gonna notice, like, hey, they did that in this other song, and whether it's a chord or part of a riff or just an idea, that's something to think about when you're writing your own music. Don't think you can't repeat yourself, because you very well can, as long as you do something different enough where it kind of warrants like the recycling of an idea. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.